The train hissed as it pulled into the dusty little station outside Rusk, Texas, the late afternoon sun slanting down over the dry boards of the platform. The sky above was a wide, aching blue, the kind that made a man feel like the world had no walls. Henry Colton stood with his boots planted firm, hat tugged low over his brow, the ache in his chest as dull and steady as it had been since his wife passed almost 3 years ago. He didn't come here for much, only to pick up a saddle he'd ordered. But something about the wind today had made his steps slow, his thoughts louder. Ever since Sarah died, the house had gone too quiet, even with the dogs pacing the porch and the chickens scratching near the barn. The loneliness wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy, like carrying a wet coat that never dried. He rubbed the back of his neck and glanced at the platform, where the passengers began stepping off the train. Most were ranch hands, a few men in dusty suits, one woman with a red parasol. Then he saw her. She wasn't the sort of woman men usually noticed. She wasn't slim, didn't walk like she was used to being looked at. Her face was round, her dress plain, stretched over broad hips and thick arms that were already holding too much. A little boy with straw-colored hair clung to her skirt, and a girl about the same age held a ragged stuffed horse, eyes darting between strangers like a deer in the brush. The woman shifted the heavy carpet bag she carried and looked down both ends of the platform. Twice. That was it. The way she looked, like she'd just been dropped into this world with no map. Like she wasn't waiting for someone because no one was coming. Henry watched her for a long while. Not out of pity. Something else. Something slower and stranger. The children were too quiet for their age. The boy rubbed his eyes, smearing dust across his cheek, and the girl kept a tight grip on her toy, as though letting go would mean losing something she couldn't get back. The woman finally set the bag down, not far from the bench near the edge, and sat with her hands folded over her lap. Her dress rode up slightly, showing worn boots and thick ankles that had likely carried her across more than a few hard miles. Henry should have looked away, but he didn't. Not when the station manager passed her without a glance. Not when a gust of wind stirred dust into her children's eyes and made them flinch. Not even when the train whistled and pulled away and everyone else was gone. Still she sat. Henry's jaw tightened. He knew what it looked like when someone had nowhere to go. He knew that stillness, the kind that came after too many hard answers and not enough soft ones. He'd seen it in the mirror after the funeral. He'd seen it again after the baby they'd lost before Sarah got sick. He stepped forward before his brain gave permission. It wasn't courage. It was instinct. She noticed him when he was just a few feet away, stood up fast, almost defensively, pulling the boy behind her and putting a hand on the girl's shoulder. Her eyes, dark, wary, met as like she was waiting for him to ask something she didn't want to answer. "I'm not selling anything," Henry said plainly. His voice wasn't harsh, but it was tired. Did someone not show? Her eyes didn't soften, but she answered. There was supposed to be a job. Woman said she needed a housekeeper. Gave me a train ticket and everything. But no one's here. He nodded once, quiet. You got family nearby? She hesitated just a beat too long. No. Friends? No. Her voice cracked on that one, but she steadied. We came from Louisiana. Henry glanced at the children. The boy's lips were dry and cracked. The girl's cheeks were flushed from heat. Whatever they'd come from hadn't been kind. Look, I ain't trying to scare you, Henry said. But it's going to get cold soon. Station don't stay open past sunset. You got somewhere to sleep. She hesitated again. No. There were rules Henry had learned to follow since losing Sarah. Don't get too close. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make promises. But this woman, with dust on her hem and 2 kids with nowhere to go, made those rules feel small. About a ranch out near Henderson, he said. It's quiet. Not much, but the roof don't leak and the stove works. If you need a place, just for the night. She didn't answer. Not right away. The little boy tugged on her skirt and whispered something. The girl just stared at Henry like she was trying to figure out if he was real. My name's Henry, he said soft. Henry Colton. "Callie," she replied. "Callie Dunn." Her voice was soft too, like she hadn't said her name out loud in a while. "This is Jamie, and that's Ruth." Henry crouched to eye level with the kids. "You two hungry?" Jamie nodded instantly. Ruth just blinked, then nodded once, quick and stiff. "I got Stu back home," he said, straightening. "And a mule that likes to think she's a dog. You be safe there, just until you get sorted." Callie didn't speak, but her eyes flicked toward the horizon, and Henry saw something pass through them. Relief, fear, exhaustion, all tangled together. "I don't take charity," she said, finally. "Not offering any," he answered. "Just supper." The road back to Henry's ranch was quiet, the kind of quiet where every wheel creak and hoofbeat seemed louder than it should. The kids fell asleep in the wagon bed before they were halfway there. Callie sat beside him with her hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed ahead like she was bracing for something. "You got people back in Louisiana?" he asked once gently. "No one worth going back for," she replied. He didn't press. He just nodded and kept his eyes on the road. Whatever storm she'd come through, it wasn't over yet. The ranch came into view just before dark. It wasn't fancy, just a weathered house, barn, and windmill. But the chimneys smoked with warmth, and the porch lamp flickered soft. Callie helped carry the kids inside. She didn't complain about the dust or the creaky floorboards. She just laid them on the old settee near the fire and sat beside them like she'd done it 100 times before. Henry served up bowls of stew without saying much. She ate like someone who hadn't had a hot meal in days. After supper, Henry poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned on the doorframe, watching the way the firelight touched her face. She looked heavier than she was, worn down more by weight she couldn't set down than by the pounds on her bones. But there was something strong in her too. Not stubborn, not proud, just steady. "You said there was a woman who offered you a job," he said at last. "You got her name?" She shook her head. "Just signed it Mrs. Brewer. Said she needed help with the house, and I could bring the children. Said she'd meet me. You still got the letter?" Callie reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Henry read it over slowly. The handwriting was neat, but the ink smeared in places. There was no return address, no real details. "This looks like someone who wanted you far from home," he said, folding it again. She looked up. "Why?" He hesitated. "Could be a trick. Someone who knew you'd be alone out here." She swallowed hard. "I thought about that. On the train. But we didn't have many choices." That quiet hit again. The kind that fills every corner when there's too much left unsaid. He set the letter down and looked at her straight. "If I offered to marry you, would you think I was crazy?" Her breath caught. She blinked once hard. "What? I live alone. House is too big for one person. You need protection, a roof. Kids need stability. And I need something too. Someone to talk to who's real. You don't even know me. I know enough." He nodded toward the children. "I see how you hold them when they sleep. I see how you haven't asked me for anything, even now. You're not here for what you can get. You're here because someone left you no other road. And I know what that feels like." She didn't answer, just sat with both hands wrapped around the coffee mug, eyes glistening in the firelight. Henry took off his hat. "We make it honest. I'm not the kind of man who touches what ain't his. But you be safe. And they grow up with a roof and a name that meant something." The clock ticked in the next room. Ruth stirred in her sleep. Callie looked at her daughter, then her son, then back at Henry. Her face was unreadable, but her shoulders softened. "All right," she whispered. He nodded once and didn't say another word. Neither of them slept much that night. Not from nerves, from the feeling that something old had ended and something raw and unknown had just begun. The morning after Henry married Callie, the wind felt different. The sun came up just the same, pouring gold over the field behind the house, but something in the air had shifted, like the earth itself paused to listen. Ruth woke first, confused and stiff from sleeping on the settee, but she didn't cry. She looked around the unfamiliar room, then padded softly into the kitchen where Callie stood at the stove, unsure how long she should stay before she was told to move. Jamie woke not long after, and Henry, already back from tending the animals, met them both with a quiet nod and 2 bowls of porridge. There were no big welcomes, no loud conversations. Just quiet movements, a few glances, the scraping of chairs on the wood floor, and the beginning of something that none of them had words for yet. That afternoon, Henry hitched up the wagon and took them into town. If Callie was going to live there, even under a name that didn't feel like hers yet, she needed to be seen. They stopped at the general store first. Mrs. Langley, who ran it since her husband's stroke, was a sharp woman with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She spotted Callie the moment they stepped inside. "New help, Henry?" she asked, voice dry. Henry didn't flinch. "Wife." Mrs. Langley blinked twice, clearly caught off guard. "I see. She'll be opening an account." Callie glanced at him, startled. Henry gave a small nod. No need for her to feel small. Not in front of folks who talk too much. Mrs. Langley hesitated, but pulled out the ledger. "We got fresh flour and sugar in this week, if you're looking to bake." Callie nodded, too nervous to speak, and turned her eyes down to the bins of beans and rice. She felt the glances behind her back, heard the murmur when the schoolteacher, Miss Evangeline Cora, walked in behind them, all pressed linen and judgmental glances. Henry didn't say much. He rarely did. But he stood close enough for Callie to feel it, and that was more than she'd had in a long time. Back at the ranch, they unpacked the bags together. Callie folded towels and stacked them in the cabinet under the sink. Ruth watched from the doorway, still clutching her stuffed horse. Jamie was outside, cautiously petting one of the barn cats. The quiet stretched long again until Henry finally said, "There's a man who helps me sometimes. Local boy. Honest. You'll see him around." And she did. His name was Eli Maddox, barely 20, lanky and pale with wild reddish hair and a habit of chewing on the inside of his cheek when he was thinking. Eli had worked for Henry on and off for the past couple of years, ever since his own father ran off and left the family farm broke. He came by the ranch the next morning, boots muddy and hands calloused, with a lazy grin that faded when he saw Callie standing in the doorway. "You didn't say anything about a wife," Eli muttered when Henry handed him a spade. "Didn't need to," Henry replied. Eli didn't push, but he watched. Watched Callie as she washed the porch steps. Watched the children playing in the dirt, eyes sharp with something more than curiosity. It wasn't mistrust. It was something else, like he was trying to fit a new piece into a picture that had long been familiar. That same week, another visitor came. Her name was Nadine Harrow, widow, 50-something, ran a Sunday prayer circle, and had opinions about everything from cornmeal to baptism. She showed up uninvited, wearing a feathered hat and a disapproving frown, just as Callie was trying to teach Ruth how to sweep the front porch. "I heard the news," Nadine said, not bothering with a greeting. "You moved quick." Callie stood straighter. "We did what made sense." "I see." Nadine sniffed. "Well, I brought a pie. Peach. Seemed like you might not have much stocked up." Callie didn't move to take it. "That was kind of you." Nadine eyed the girl beside her. "She yours?" Callie nodded. "Both of them." "Well," Nadine said, "smile tight. Some women land on their feet. Others land in better boots." That night, Callie sat on the porch long after the kids went to sleep. Henry joined her, setting down a mug of tea beside her. The stars stretched overhead in that endless Texas way, and for a while neither of them spoke. "She said I married up," Callie murmured finally. Henry didn't laugh. He just sipped his tea. "She says a lot of things." Callie looked at him. "You think I did?" He shook his head. "I think you did what you had to." "So did I." It was the first time she felt like breathing without holding something back. But not everything was calm. Something was off in town. Henry started noticing it in the way conversations ended when he walked by. The way folks who used to talk about feed prices or weather now looked over his shoulder or toward the kids. There were rumors. Eli heard them first. Whispers that Callie had been seen in Baton Rouge, working in a hotel that turned a blind eye to the kind of business that never made it into polite conversation. Whispers that she wasn't widowed, but on the run. Henry didn't ask her. Not yet. He wanted to believe it didn't matter. But he watched closer. Watched how she froze when the train whistle blew. Watched how she tensed when someone knocked at the door unexpectedly. There was something buried deep in her silence, a kind of fear that didn't go away even after good meals and soft beds. Eli came to him one night after finishing up the fencing. "She's scared, Henry." "I know. Of someone specific?" Henry nodded. "I think so." "You think she's lying?" Henry looked out at the horizon. "No, I think she's hiding." It wasn't long before the name came up. Callie was in a root cellar when a man rode up on a lean black horse, dust-covered and mean-eyed. He asked for her by name, her old name, the one she hadn't said in weeks. Henry told him she wasn't there. The man didn't argue, just stared at the house too long, then tipped his hat and rode off. Henry didn't tell Callie. Not yet. But when she came back up, he saw it in her face. She knew. "Who was it?" she asked, voice small. "Stranger," Henry said, but she didn't believe him. That night, Callie finally sat across from him at the table and told the truth. "He wasn't my husband," she said, folding her hands tightly. "He was the man who owned the boarding house where I worked. He was kind at first. Then on. He liked control. And when I tried to leave, he made sure I couldn't. He found me once. In Vicksburg. Told me if I ran again, I wouldn't get far. So I stopped running for a while. But when I saw what he was doing to Ruth, just how he looked at her, I packed a bag and didn't look back." Henry said nothing for a long time, just stared at the wood grain of the table. Then he reached across and covered her hand with his. "You don't have to run anymore." She stared down at their hands. "You don't even know what he's capable of." "I don't care. You're not alone now." But it wasn't just about the man. Henry knew there were others who might use that past against her. Folks like Nadine or Mrs. Langley, who already believed that Callie had somehow tricked her way into a respectable name. And then there was Eli. He was loyal, but he was young, and he was watching Callie with an expression that wasn't all suspicion anymore. It was something more complicated, something he maybe didn't understand himself. When he found Callie out behind the barn one evening, trying to fix a broken latch, he offered to help. She hesitated, but let him. "You don't have to stay," he said after a while. "You know that, right? If he's keeping you here." She gave him a look that could cut a man clean through. "He married me. He feeds my children. He listens when I speak. That's more than most men have ever done for me." Eli stepped back. Didn't mean nothing by it. But he had, and Callie knew it. That night, she told Henry, and he nodded, jaw clenched. "I'll talk to him." "No," she said. "Just let it lie. He's just confused." Still, Henry kept a closer eye after that. And not just on Eli. The man on the black horse came again. And this time, Henry wasn't there. It was Callie who stepped outside, her children asleep upstairs. The man dismounted, slow and casual, like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Never figured you for the ranch type," he said, smiling. Callie stood her ground. "You don't belong here. I belong wherever you are, sweetheart. You know that." She held a small pistol at her side, half hidden in her skirt. Henry had shown her how to use it 2 nights after she confessed everything. Her hand didn't shake. "If you come closer, I'll shoot." He laughed. "You don't got it in you." She aimed. "Try me." He stopped laughing then. Henry came home just as the man turned and rode off again. Callie didn't say anything at first, just handed him the pistol and went to check on the children. Henry stood for a long while after that, watching the road, listening to the wind. Something was coming. He could feel it. And if he was going to protect her, if this family was going to have any chance at a future, he'd need more than fences and silence. He'd need to be willing to fight, because secrets never stayed buried long out here. Not in Texas. Not when the sun set slow and the shadows stretched wide. The days that followed were thick with unease. Every corner of Henry's ranch held a strange kind of stillness now, like the land itself had learned to hold its breath. Callie moved through the house like a shadow, always near the children, never far from the front window. Ruth and Jamie had begun asking questions about the man on the horse, about why Mama jumped at every knock, why Henry checked the barn 3 times before bed. And Henry, who once found comfort in the quiet, now found it hard to bear. He told himself it was just the past trying to claw its way back. But even he knew that sometimes the past didn't come alone. Eli grew restless more than before. He worked faster, harder, driving fence posts into the dry ground with the kind of anger Henry didn't recognize in him. And when Henry finally cornered him one evening by the barn, the younger man didn't bother pretending. "You trust her too easy," Eli said, throwing a coil of wire into the cart. "She's my wife," Henry replied evenly. "That don't mean she's telling you everything." Henry narrowed his eyes. "You know something?" Eli hesitated, just long enough for it to matter. "No, just a feeling." Henry stepped closer. "If there's something I need to know." "She's got a letter." Henry blinked. "What?" "I saw it. Dropped it while she was cleaning the porch. Thought it was trash at first, but I read enough to know it was from that man. He said he'd come back. Said he had papers that proved something. Didn't say what." Henry's chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Eli shrugged, jaw clenched. "Didn't know if it was my place." That night, Henry didn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen long after the house went dark, turning Eli's words over in his mind. If Callie had been hiding that letter, was it fear or something more? By morning, he found her in the back room folding laundry. The children were still asleep. The window was open, breeze catching the hem of her dress. "You got a letter," he said without preamble. She stilled, hands pausing mid-fold. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want you to worry. Too late for that." She turned to him slowly. "You think I'm lying to you? I think I don't know what you're not saying. I think there's more." She sat on the edge of the bed, twisting her fingers. "He said he married me. Years ago. That I signed something at the boarding house. I was young. It was supposed to be for a room. I didn't read it close. I just wanted a safe place for Ruth. He's saying it was a marriage certificate." Henry didn't move. "Is it true?" "I don't know. I didn't sign nothing in a church. No preacher. But he says the paper's legal. That he has it. And that if I don't come back, he'll use it to take Ruth and Jamie." Henry took a slow breath. "They're not his." "No," she said fiercely. "But that doesn't mean he won't try. You know how things work for women like me." He did. A piece of paper, any paper, was all it took for a court to look the other way. And if the man had influence or money or enough gall to ride back onto this land twice, then he had more than empty threats. The tension at the ranch thickened. Even the animals felt it. Horses jumpy, dogs barking at shadows. Henry started sleeping with his rifle propped beside the bed. He didn't say much to Callie, and she didn't press. But the space between them grew. Then the twist came. One morning, as Henry saddled his horse for a supply run, Sheriff Dobbs rode up the trail, dust clinging to his boots and worry etched into every line of his face. He was a big man, with graying hair and a voice that carried even when he tried to speak soft. "Henry," he said, eyes scanning the porch where Callie stood watching. "I need to talk to you." They stepped into the barn, and the sheriff handed Henry a folded notice. "That man, Calder Royce, isn't bluffing. He's got a legal document. Claims he married Callie Dunn in Baton Rouge. Registered it in Mississippi. And he's filed a petition in Texas for custody of the children." Henry stared at the paper. "He's not their father. Don't matter. If she was his legal wife at the time of their birth, the court will presume paternity unless proven otherwise. She was never his wife. He says otherwise. And unless she can prove it wasn't real, she might lose them. You all might." Henry's voice dropped. "What about our marriage?" "Technically, it's invalid if she was already wed to someone else." Henry cursed under his breath. What the hell kind of law is that? The kind that favors the man with the oldest paper. They stood there in silence. The only sound was the wind through the slats and the distant cry of a hawk. "What do I do?" Henry asked. "Find something to fight him with. Or run." Henry didn't run. Instead, he returned to the house and handed Callie the notice. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She sat down, folded the paper neatly, and held it on her lap like it might vanish if she kept it still long enough. That evening, Henry rode to town. Not to buy feed, to see a lawyer. Mr. Brackenridge was a thin, balding man with an office that smelled of ink and paper dust. He listened to Henry's story with a grave expression. "You need evidence that the document Royce holds was forged or coerced," he said, "or proof that she was never in Mississippi at the time of filing. She doesn't have anything, not even a witness." Brackenridge sighed. "Then your best bet is to go public. Let folks know what he's trying to do. Community pressure might keep the courts from siding with him, but it won't stop him from trying." The trip back felt longer. Henry's mind spun, not with fear, but with fury. The idea that Callie, who had suffered quietly for years, now risked losing the children she'd held together through every hardship, was unbearable. And worse, he knew that Calder Royce wouldn't stop at legal tricks. The man wanted power, control. He wanted to see her crawl. When Henry returned, Callie was in the barn with Jamie, brushing down one of the horses. She looked tired, but there was fire in her eyes when she turned to him. "I won't let him take them." "He'll try," Henry said. "Then we make it ugly." She had a plan, a risky one, but might work. "I still have the satchel I ran with. It's got receipts, notes, letters he wrote, one where he threatened to burn the place down with me in it. It's back in Baton Rouge. I hid it under the floorboard of my old room." Henry didn't hesitate. "I'll go." She grabbed his arm. "He could kill you. Let him try." Before dawn the next day, Henry left with Eli at his side. Callie stayed behind, armed and silent, watching the road like she expected the devil to come walking up it. And maybe he would. The journey to Baton Rouge was hard. 3 days through heat and dust, with only stolen sleep under trees and meals from tins. When they arrived, Henry found the old boarding house half collapsed, the porch sagging like an old drunk. But the room was there, locked but not sealed. They broke in by night, pulled up the floorboards. The satchel was there. Inside, a stack of old letters dated and signed by Royce. Some vulgar, some threatening. One, specifically, where he mentioned forging that stupid certificate so Callie would never leave again. Henry tucked it into his coat and got out. They didn't get far. On the edge of town, Royce was waiting. He blocked the road with his horse, shotgun across his lap, smile lazy. "Looking for souvenirs, Colton?" Henry didn't answer. Royce nodded at Eli. "Kid ain't even old enough to shave. You bring him to die with you." Eli raised his rifle. "Try me." "Move," Henry said quietly, eyes on Royce. "Or I'll put you down like a snake in the henhouse." Royce grinned, like he expected that. But he moved. The journey home was tense, but quiet. When they returned, Callie met them at the gate, eyes wide when she saw the envelope in Henry's hand. "You found it." He nodded. "We found him too, but didn't waste time. Brought the documents straight to the sheriff, who swore in Mr. Brackenridge that very evening." The case hadn't even hit the judge's desk yet, but by the time it did, Royce's claim looked like a house built on dust. The letter, signed, dated, and clear, was proof of fraud. Not enough to put Royce behind bars, but enough to keep the children out of his reach forever. Enough to make the court recognize Callie and Henry's marriage as valid. It should have ended there. But Royce didn't like losing. That night, someone cut the fence on the west side of the ranch. 2 horses went missing. A fire started near the shed, but Henry caught it before it spread. 2 days later, Jamie found a rattlesnake in the root cellar, one that hadn't wandered there by accident. Henry started keeping the rifle by the door again. So did Callie. They knew what this was. Not legal, not loud, just pressure, fear. Royce's way of saying, "I'm still watching." Henry sent Eli to town to stay with friends. Told him not to come back until it was over. Eli argued. Henry didn't budge. On the 3rd night, Callie woke to a sound at the back of the house. She slipped from bed, barefoot, pistol in hand. Henry followed, silent and ready. There he was, Royce, standing in the dark, lantern in hand, face twisted with the kind of hate that didn't burn out. "You think a piece of paper changes anything?" he snarled. Henry stepped in front of Callie. "It changes everything." Royce raised his arm, but before he could fire, a sharp blast split the air. It wasn't Henry. It was Callie. The bullet caught Royce in the shoulder. He dropped, howling, crawling back toward the dark. Henry aimed again, but Callie grabbed his arm. "Let him go. He'll come back." "No," she said. "He won't." She was right. Royce vanished after that night. No one saw him again. Maybe he bled out in a ditch. Maybe he made it out and never looked back. No one cared, because something had changed. The ranch no longer felt haunted. The silence returned, but this time it was calm. The kind that settled in your bones when you knew you were safe. The children laughed again. Ruth ran through the fields barefoot. Jamie learned to fish. Henry repaired the fence with a smile for the first time in years. Callie sat on the porch one evening, the same one where she'd first held that coffee cup, watching the sun go down with her daughter on her lap and her husband at her side. They didn't speak. It didn't need to. The quiet didn't last long. It never did in places like East Texas, where land stretched for miles, but news traveled like wildfire, fed by whispers and old grudges. Word of what had happened between Henry Colton and Calder Royce spread faster than rain on dry stone. Some said Henry killed him and buried the body. Others claimed Callie pulled the trigger because she was a madwoman with a hidden past. Most of it wasn't true, but truth didn't matter much in towns built on pride and porch talk. At first, the stares in town were subtle. Then came the distance. The schoolteacher, Miss Cora, stopped waving when she passed on horseback. The store clerks no longer called Henry by name. And when Callie stepped into the church with Ruth and Jamie in hand, the entire back pew emptied out like someone had dropped a snake in the aisle. Callie kept her chin up through all of it. Henry tried to do the same. But even he wasn't immune to the sting of watching lifelong neighbors look past him like he wasn't there. He told himself it didn't matter. That the ranch, the kids, the woman he'd married, they were enough. But in the stillness of the barn, mending a gate or feeding the animals, he started to wonder if they were building a life in a place that had already decided to shut them out. The pressure grew heavier when Ruth caught a fever. It started as a cough, small, dry, easy to ignore. But by the third day, her forehead was burning and her little body trembled under the quilts. Callie didn't sleep, barely ate, her hands moving constantly from compress to cup to bowl of broth. She could barely get Ruth to swallow. Jamie clung to his mother's skirt and cried night. Henry did what he could, but it was clear Callie was the one holding everything together, even as she came apart. Henry rode into town to fetch the doctor. Dr. Headley was a lean, nervous man who'd known Henry since they were boys, but even he hesitated when Henry stepped through the door. "She's sick," Headley asked. "Fever. Bad. Your wife's child." "She's my daughter," Henry said evenly. Headley looked away. "I'll come." The visit was short. Headley took one look at Ruth, listened to her chest, and frowned. "It's a lung infection. I can give her tincture, but she needs rest. Clean air. Quiet." When he left, Henry walked him to his buggy. "You think she'll pull through?" he asked. Headley avoided his eyes. "Children surprise you. Sometimes they make it when no one expects. Sometimes they don't." Henry stepped closer. "Don't lie to me." Headley sighed. "If she was born from stronger stock, I'd feel more certain. But you've taken in someone you don't fully know, Henry. Don't let emotion blind you to what might come." That was the moment Henry realized how deep the judgment had sunk. Even the doctor saw Ruth as less, as weak, as someone else's child, not his. Back inside, Callie was wiping Ruth's face with a cloth, her own face pale with exhaustion. Henry crouched beside her, gently taking her hand. "She'll get better," he said. Callie didn't answer. She just looked at him with hollow eyes. "I never let her get this sick before," she whispered. "I kept her safe all those years. How could I bring her here and let this happen?" "You didn't let anything happen," Henry said. "This isn't your fault." But guilt had its own voice, and it was louder than his. That night, as they sat beside Ruth's bed, Callie finally broke. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, "and you're not going to like it." Henry waited, eyes locked on hers. "I knew Calder Royce was dangerous before I left," she said. "But I didn't just leave for the kids. I left because I stole from him. Not money. Letters. Journals. I took them so he wouldn't hurt another girl the way he hurt me. I thought maybe someone could use them one day, maybe even the law. But when he realized what I took, that's when he really came after me. Henry leaned back. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I didn't want you to think I came to you to hide. I came to survive. And then I stayed because of you. He stood, pacing slowly, hands curled into fists. You should have told me, he said. You had no right to keep that from me. He could have come back again. He won't, she said. I'm sure of it now. You don't know that. No, I don't, she said. But I know what kind of man you are. And I know I'd rather have your anger than your pity. His anger was quiet. It always was. But something cracked in him then, not trust, exactly, but the illusion that their life was built on solid ground. Now it felt like it had been built on sand all along. The next day, the schoolteacher came to the ranch. Miss Cora arrived unannounced, her dress too clean for the dusty trail, her expression unreadable. Callie met her on the porch. I heard your daughter's ill, Cora said. That's unfortunate. Callie said nothing. I also heard there are questions about your marriage. What questions? Well, Cora said, smoothing her skirt. Some parents are wondering if children raised in a house of lies should be sharing a classroom with theirs. Callie blinked. You're saying Ruth and Jamie aren't welcome? Cora's smile was thin. I'm saying the town watches. And it remembers. It always does. That night, Callie packed bags. I'll take the kids to my sister's in Austin, she told Henry. Just until things settle. You shouldn't be punished for what I've brought here. Henry stared at her like he didn't know who she was. You think I'll let you walk out now? He said. After everything? I don't want them growing up thinking they don't belong, she whispered. That they're less. They do belong, he said. Right here, even if the whole town says otherwise. I don't give a damn what the town says, Henry said. I care what you say. And if you want to leave, then fine. But don't do it for me. Don't do it thinking I need permission to stand beside you. They didn't sleep that night. They sat on the porch with Ruth between them, her breathing raspy but steadier. The stars shone above, indifferent and eternal. We're not done fighting, he told her. I'm tired of fighting, she replied. Then let me do it for a while. In the days that followed, Henry made choices. He stopped trying to fit in. He pulled his business from the store that turned its back, started trading with farmers farther out, built his own smokehouse. When the school refused Ruth, he hired a tutor from Henderson, paid her in beef and fresh eggs. When folks whispered, he looked them in the eye until they looked away first. But not all the changes were outward. Henry started noticing the cracks in himself. How quick he was to protect, but how slow he'd been to trust. How much he'd expected Callie to give without fully offering his own past. So one night, he sat her down and told her things he hadn't said out loud since Sarah died. About the baby they lost. About the nights he sat in the barn holding her old shawl, afraid the house would never feel like home again. About how guilt had carved a space in him no one else could reach, until her. Callie cried quietly, not out of sadness, but recognition. Because for the first time, they weren't just surviving each other's storms. They were sitting in the middle of them together. Jamie began to speak more, to laugh. Ruth's cough faded, and her cheeks grew round again. She helped Callie bake bread and insisted on picking wildflowers each morning. The house filled with smells and warmth, with noise that didn't feel like breaking. And then came the letter, folded and sealed with red wax, from a lawyer in Baton Rouge. It said Calder Royce had died, found in an abandoned rail car near the river, likely from infection. The letter confirmed what they'd suspected. He'd never recovered from a bullet. But what they didn't expect was what came next. He left behind no family, no heirs. But inside the letter was a second envelope. One Royce had dictated to be delivered to Callie if he died. Henry opened it for her. It read simply, "You think you won. You didn't. You'll always be what I made you." Callie burned it without reading more. She stood in the yard, flames licking the edge of the page, and let it fall to ash. Then she looked at Henry and said the words that would stay with him for years. "No man makes me." That winter came early, but the house stayed warm. Henry added a room off the back for the children. Callie planted a garden. Eli returned and apologized, and Callie forgave him with a nod and a handshake. Even the neighbors, some of them, began to come around. A pie left on the porch. A saddle mended without charge. Small things, but real. Their love wasn't loud. It wasn't made of flowers or promises. It was made of doing, of waking early and rocking sick children, of building fences side by side, of sitting quiet together when the world grew too heavy. And when Ruth asked one night, "Mama, what does it mean to be safe?" Callie pulled her close and whispered, "It means you don't have to look over your shoulder anymore." They weren't just surviving now. They were living. Spring brought wild rainstorms that flooded the creek and turned the dirt roads into rivers of red clay. But the Colton Ranch held firm. The house stood solid. The fences stayed upright. And inside, the family, Henry, Callie, Ruth, and Jamie, moved with a rhythm that felt steady, almost peaceful. For the first time in a long time, Callie let herself believe in normal. But peace has a way of cracking. It began with a stranger. He rode in one morning before sunrise, a lean man with a graying beard, soaked from the storm, carrying a bundle under one arm. He didn't give a name, just asked for Henry Colton. Callie met him at the porch, the shotgun behind the door within reach. "I need to speak to your husband," the man said. "It's about Royce." Callie froze. Her heart sank like a stone in her chest. "Royce is dead." The man nodded. "I know. That's why I came." Henry stepped out behind her, pulling on his coat. "Let's talk in the barn," he said, eyes never leaving the man. Inside, the man opened the bundle. Papers, old and worn, some torn at the corners. Letters, ledgers, a folded photograph of Royce, younger, standing beside another man, the stranger. "I was his cousin," he said. "Barely saw him these last few years, but we served time together once, back in Louisiana. He left me this when he knew he was dying." Henry picked up one of the papers. A list of names and dates. Girls. Payments. Rooms. He was running more than a boarding house, the man said grimly. He kept records. Sick sort of pride. "Your wife's name's in here, but so are others. Young ones. Some never left." Henry stiffened. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because someone else is coming," the man replied. "Someone worse." The name he gave was Elijah Parson, a name Callie recognized the second Henry brought it back to her. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed when she heard it, her hands suddenly cold. "He was Royce's silent partner," she said. "He stayed in the shadows, but he was the one who brought in the girls. Promised them jobs. Promised them safety. He's the one who started all." Henry looked at her. "Why didn't you ever mention him?" "Because I didn't think he'd come after me. Royce was personal. Parson was business. He doesn't chase women, he buys silence." But Parson had reason to come now. If Royce's records leaked, if Henry passed them to the sheriff, there would be consequences. Not just for Royce's memory, but for powerful men with clean reputations. Henry paced the room for a long while. Then he said the thing Callie dreaded. "We have to go public." Callie's voice was barely above a whisper. "If you do that, he'll come for us. He's coming either way." She stood. "And what if he hurts Ruth? Jamie? Then I'll bury him." But it wasn't that simple. Henry knew it. Callie knew it. Elijah Parson had money, friends in courtrooms, men on payrolls. He wouldn't ride in with a gun. He'd come with ink and legal threats, with men in suits who'd call Ruth and Jamie into question again, who'd tear apart everything they'd built on this ranch. Still, Henry took the bundle to Sheriff Dobbs. And just like that, the storm began again. Word spread fast. Rumors of a trafficking ring tied to the old boarding house made the town buzz like a kicked hornet's nest. Folks whispered about Callie again, this time louder. Some called her brave. Others said she was trouble, that she'd brought danger to their quiet town. The school shut its doors entirely, claiming external threats. The sheriff doubled his rounds near the ranch. And then one morning, Callie found the front gate open and Ruth's doll hanging from the post by a rope. That was the moment Henry sent the children away. He packed a small trunk and put Ruth and Jamie on a wagon headed for Lila Maddox's house 2 counties over. Eli's sister, a widow with 4 kids of her own and a heart big enough to take in 2 more. Callie didn't argue. She kissed their heads, held them tight, then stood in the road as the wagon vanished over the ridge. The house was too quiet after that. Henry barely spoke. He worked from sunup to sundown, fixed things that didn't need fixing, sharpened tools twice over. Callie cleaned the same windows every day, watched the road like it owed her an explanation. Then the fire came. Just after midnight, the barn lit up like a lantern. Flames roared high into the sky, the horses screaming inside. Henry and Callie ran barefoot into the smoke, cutting ropes, flinging open stalls. They saved 2, lost 3. By morning, the barn was ash. The sheriff confirmed it. Kerosene poured under the door. Deliberate. "This isn't just a warning," he said. "They're escalating." Henry didn't wait. He rode to the newspaper office in Henderson. He handed over the records. Every page, every detail. The editor, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth and a long memory, agreed to run the story. Front page. No names blacked out. Callie wept that night. Not out of fear, but something else. "Why are you still here?" she asked Henry. "You didn't sign up for any of this." He looked at her, tired and dirty and bloodied from trying to pull a mule out of the burning barn. "I didn't sign up for peace," he said. "I signed up for you." And then he kissed her, soft, slow, with everything he hadn't said since that shotgun wedding at the train station. The house might have been surrounded by ghosts, but in that moment, they were alone. Real, alive. But the story didn't end there. 2 days after the newspaper ran the article, the stranger returned. The cousin. He was shaking, out of breath. His coat was torn and his eyes were wild. "They're here," he said. "Parsons' men. They're heading this way." I tried to stop them. Henry grabbed his rifle. Callie grabbed the pistol. They didn't run. At dusk, 4 men rode in. Not with torches, not with guns drawn, but calm, dressed neat, eyes cold. One stepped forward. "Mr. Colton," he said, "you're in possession of private business records. Our employer would like them returned." Henry stood in the doorway, shotgun in hand. "They're already published." The man nodded. "Then our business is done." But Callie stepped forward. "No, it's not. I know what you are. I know what he did." The man smiled. "No one's going to believe the word of a whore who ran." Callie didn't flinch. "I'm not running anymore." That night, Henry wrote his will. Not out of fear, but out of certainty. He knew Parson wouldn't let it lie. Not when his name was now in ink, tied to the unspeakable. Not when others might step forward too. Henry made sure Callie's name was on the deed. That Ruth and Jamie were listed as his children. That the ranch would pass to them. And then, finally, he told her the truth he'd buried for years. "I married you because I was lonely," he said, "because I was tired of the empty. But I stayed because I saw something in you I never saw in myself. A will to live. A fire I thought had gone out in the world." Callie looked at him, eyes full of grief and awe. "You saved us." He shook his head. "You saved me." The next day, a lawyer showed up with court papers. A suit filed on behalf of Elijah Parson. Slander, defamation, theft. But Henry had already sent copies of the records to the judge, to the attorney general, to 2 churches and the governor's office. The battle was public now. Callie stood outside the house that evening and watched the sun go down. The land smelled like ash. The barn was still blackened. The smokehouse gone, but the house still stood. And so did she. "You think it'll ever end?" she asked. Henry stood beside her. "Maybe not. But if it doesn't, then we make sure they don't forget who stood up." Callie reached for his hand. "They tried to bury me," she said, "but all they did was plant me." He looked at her and smiled. "Then let's see what you grow." Their fight wasn't over. But for the first time, they weren't afraid of it. Secrets had come to light. Truth had torn open old wounds. But in the wreckage stood something unbreakable. Love, earned not through ease, but through fire, through grit, through the kind of truth you can only face when you've lost everything and still choose to stand. The rain stopped the day Ruth and Jamie returned. Callie stood by the gate, her hands pressed to her chest, heart thudding with something between hope and fear. The wagon creaked down the lane, familiar in every sound. Ruth was the first to jump down. Her cheeks round again, eyes bright, carrying a little blue bundle of wildflowers she must have picked along the way. Jamie followed, slower, quieter, clutching a toy horse Henry had carved for him before they sent him away. Neither child spoke right away. They just stared at the house like they were measuring if it was still home. Callie dropped to her knees and held them both, her body shaking. Not from grief, not from fear, but from the ache of survival. Inside the house, nothing had been redecorated, only cleaned. The scorch marks on the outside wall near the barn were still there. The land bore every scar it had been given, and they let it because this time there was no need to pretend nothing had happened. Henry sat on the porch, watching the family from a distance at first. When Jamie ran to him and hugged him without words, Henry's hand trembled as it landed on the boy's back. The land healed in pieces. A neighbor brought a sack of seeds. Another dropped off planks of wood for a new barn. Nobody said much, but the gesture spoke. Maybe not of forgiveness, but of recognition. They had seen a fire rise and a family not run from it. And slowly, the town changed too. The school reopened, and Ruth took her seat with her chin held high. One afternoon, a girl named Lacey shared her lunch with her. That same week, Jamie chased chickens with 2 boys down by the creek. They were building something again, not a home, but a place that welcomed them. The trial never came. 3 more women stepped forward with claims against Parson. His suit was dropped. His name, once only whispered in fear, now stained newspapers across 3 states. And Henry's name, quiet, forgotten before, started to carry something else. Something weighty. Not pride, but respect. Callie stood in the garden one morning, her hands in the earth, and whispered softly, "We're not ghosts anymore." That spring, the barn was rebuilt. Stronger, wider. Henry let Ruth and Jamie hammer nails where they could reach, and when the roof finally went on, they all sat beneath it and shared bread and cheese like it was a feast. One evening, Callie pulled out the last thing she'd kept from her past, the scarf she'd worn the day Henry found her at the train station. She folded it carefully and placed it inside a small wooden box. "What are you going to do with it?" Henry asked. "Keep it," she said, "to remind me of who I was." "Do you need reminding?" She smiled. "Only sometimes. Why forget how far we've come?" They buried the box beneath the new oak tree Ruth had planted, its leaves just beginning to spread. That summer, a letter arrived from Baton Rouge, a distant cousin of Royce's, writing only to say he'd read the papers and hoped Henry and his wife were well. There was no threat, no curse, just silence after that. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Henry and Callie sat on the porch swing, the crickets loud in the field. "You ever think about how it all started?" Henry asked. Callie nodded. "You looked tired, like you didn't believe in anything." "And you?" he asked. "I didn't think anyone would see me." He turned to her, his voice low. "I see you now." She leaned against him, the swing creaking as it moved. They never called what they had perfect. It wasn't meant to be. It was built from broken things. Burnt barns, stolen papers, near-lost children, secrets that had clawed their way out, but had grown steady, honest, real. And in the end, the girl who thought she'd always be running had found a man who didn't ask her to be less to be loved. She was whole, even with her scars. He was full, even with his losses. And together, they learned something most folks never did. That sometimes, the past doesn't bury you. Sometimes it plants you, and you rise.